This is Grace from Growing with Grace Homesteading, from the garden to the jars. Okay, these are the backs of the chickens. I take all the backs, I put them in this roaster and fill it up with water and then roast it for 24 hours. After the broth cools off in the roaster, I put it in the refrigerator overnight to let it cool because the fat rises to the top. And then what you do, you skim the top, get all the fat off. Now if you want the fat on, you can. That's just preference. But it kind of makes it a little bit too greasy. So you skim this all off. After you skim the fat off the top, then I put it in a little heavy here, into a pan here. And then what we're going to do is then bring this to a boil. Okay, before you start your canner and put your broth in the canner, always check your jars. Make sure there's no cracks, and always run your finger across the top. Make sure there's no rough edges or you won't get a good seal. So a good rule of thumb of how much water to put in the canner, I usually go by my index finger. I put it down in the canner, the bottom, and fill the water up to that far, and that always gets me the right amount of water that I need. Okay, and then I fill my jars. This is how I sterilize my jars. I put water in the jars. Add a little bit more water. I usually do it till it's about that far up on the jars. You put the lid on it, and again, I don't have no seal. This again is how I sterilize my jars. And then I bring it to a boil. And then once it boils, I put it on a very low boil for 15 minutes. And some people put their jars in a dishwasher. I don't, it doesn't matter to me how it's done, but this is how I do it. Okay, after the broth comes to a boil, and then my jars here are sterile. I only do, let me get the canner lid off. Okay. The jars are good and hot, good and sterile. And I always put a napkin underneath or some kind of a towel or something underneath. Now in here, now they say you don't have to sterilize your lids, but I've been doing this for 40 years. I just can't seem to not do it. So, and then I have another container here. I poured my excess water in there. These jars are good and sterile. They've been in here for about a half hour. Now, I always keep the burner on low. I put my lid back on and keep the jars good and hot. That's what I like by sterilizing my stuff in the jar, in the canner, so the jars can stay good and hot. Okay, then I'm going to fill the broth up to 1 inch, which is right here on the jars. Whoops. And again, by having your jars in the canner, you keep them hot, and that's why I only do about half at a time. That way we're not pouring hot liquid into a cold jar. Now I always use a towel on the table. It helps because this can get messy. So, okay. Whoa, a little bit too much. All right. I kind of dumped this up. Yes, this is hot. Been doing this for over 30 years. Now I take a clean, damp, sterile rag, hot, and I wipe the tops off with. I've had some people use different kinds of things to wipe them off with, but you got to get any excess, like especially fat juices, off the top of it. But wipe them off really, really good. If not, they won't seal. All right, Toby, can you put the lids on for me? Okay. Oh, Toby always has a little bit of troubles getting them out, huh, Toby? Here, let's get them a little bit. Do the top one like that. There you go. Okay. You don't screw the jar, the lids, you don't screw these on tight. Just finger tight, just quick tight. That's it. All right, thank you, Toby. This is Toby's favorite part of canning. I got that one on. Okay. Of course, the water's still good and hot. The cans are still good and jars are good and hot. I put these back in. I take one out as I do this, and then just repeat the process for the rest of the jars. Okay, after we get everything in the canner, now this canner is over 40 years old, and it is very hard to get seals for them. The companies went out of business, so what you got to do to make this work, don't throw your canners out. It is possible. You can get you get the part number, and they'll get a seal that is compatible, similar to that, which is just a very minimal smaller than what this is, which does not form a seal. So I discovered how to get a seal so I can keep using my canners. Rubber expands. So I have some boiling hot water here. I put this down in the water. I don't know, can you show that? Oh, it's very hot water. So rubber expands. And I just need it to expand just so small in order for this to work. So I'll leave it in there for about 5 minutes. So after the 5 minutes is up, you pull this out, dry it up, and then I have some olive oil here. Put a little bit of the olive oil on. Put your seal on. And your canner is ready to go. There. Always have troubles getting that on. Okay, and then the next thing I do, now that this is all sealed and on, okay, you turn, before you put the pressure thing on, you bring this to a boil. When the steam starts coming out, you let it steam for 10 minutes before you put the pressure thing on. Now that the 10 minutes is up, you got steam coming out. So it's hard to see. It's very hot. So I have pint jars in here, and you put it at 10 pounds pressure. Put that on there. And it'd probably take about 15 minutes for the pressure to build up and then to start jiggling and stuff like that. And when that starts, then we'll get right back to the video then. Now that the canner has cooled down, it took about 30 minutes. This gauge is hot. Now, don't open your canner and throw the lid off. You can break your jars. I've had jars explode, so slowly twist it off. Lift it up away from you, gently, just a little bit, and I pull it aside a little bit like that for about maybe about 2 minutes. Now that the 2 minutes is up, I still don't take the lid completely off. I just kind of set it part way to the side a little here. Let some of the steam get some of that pressure, you know, from the hotness here. Once I stop seeing the steam come out, and then I leave it sit here for 10 minutes before I take the jars out. When you go take the jars out, you don't have to squeeze too hard, but I always lift them up a little bit, hold it for a second, just in case it breaks, because you don't want it to break all over your counter. It's better to have it break in here. And then I place the jars here about 1 inch from each other. Can you see this? Mm-hmm. Okay. You leave a space in between them so that the steam can, the heat, it makes to cool off the jars a little bit more evenly. Okay. After the jars sit here for a little bit, could be 2 minutes, could be 10 minutes, and all of a sudden you hear little popping and pinging noises. That means that the centers here, they're sealing. So, okay, let's go back and do a quick review. Before you sterilize your jars, check for cracks and nicks. If you, for some reason, have some film on your, like a white film on your jars, you can always soak your jars in vinegar water, like 1 cup of vinegar to a gallon of water. Usually that takes care of it. But to keep that from happening, when you get your jars in the canner and your food before you start the timer, just put about 2 tablespoons of vinegar in the canner, and that should take care of it. Also too, before you put any liquids, hot liquids in your jars, always heat your jars up for a good 10 minutes. That helps from breakage. And again, with the older canners, don't throw them out. There's a way to be able to use the newer seals with the older canners. And again, you go back into the video and I explain what you can do. Also, with once you get the lid on the canner and you get the gauge on, you let the steam for 10 minutes before you put the gauge on. After the canner's done, you let the pressure go down completely. And then after the pressure's down completely, you let the canner sit for 10 minutes. It helps with the cooling process and the pressure. Then you never lift your canner off fast, very quickly. Do it very slowly. Again, as in the video, I showed and demonstrated how that's done. You leave about 2 inches, 1 to 2 inches, you know, once they come out, and then you let the jars sit for 12 to 24 hours. Keep drafts away. Don't keep fans on it or anything like that. I have had jars break. When I've had a fan, it was hot, I put the fan on, and I've actually had jars break. So, and never move your jars while they're sealing, because it could cause the seals to fail. And then, like I said before, you know, listen to pings. When you hear the pings and the dings and that, then you know your jars are being sealed. So, okay, well, thanks for watching my show with Growing with Grace, from the garden to the jars, and have a good evening. Oh, you can leave a comment below and hit like and share. After you check the lids to make sure they're sealed, you take some hot soapy water in a sink. You wash all your jars off. I do this with all jars. I even had this happen with green beans. Food residue gets on the outside of the jars, and then it molds and mildews. And then when it does that, it can start like corrosion on your lids, and then your lids will, you know, then there won't be a good seal on your lids. And then give it a quick rinse. Then the only thing left to do is to put the dates on your jars and then put them on your shelves. Out of 29 chickens, this is how much broth that I was able to make, plus 9 more of the pints. My daughter came over and took her share. I can also for my 2 older married children and their families. So I was able to get 18 quarts and 17 pints of chicken broth. One thing I did fail to say in the video when I was making my broth was that I do not season a lot of my foods, only because I also can for, like, my 2 older kids, and we all have different purposes of why we're using the broth, so therefore we can season it to our own taste. So thank you for watching my video with Growing with Grace, from the garden to the jars. If you have any questions about the canning and stuff, leave it in the comments below, and hit like and subscribe. Thank you.